Thom Hartmann here on the best of the rest of economic and labor news. You need to know this. Despite what you may hear from the right-wing media, institutional racism is still a very real problem in the United States, and it creates a vicious cycle that keeps minority families from rising out of poverty. According to a recent study from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, the racial makeup of neighborhoods in Baltimore is, quote, the most significant predictor of whether a mortgage loan gets made, end quote. After widespread unrest following the death of Freddie Gray earlier this year, researchers began to look at causes of persistent racial wealth disparities. They discovered that black families have a far more difficult time getting home loans in Baltimore, and banks are rejecting loans more often in black neighborhoods. Researchers looked at government mortgage data and found that banks have issued twice as many loans to white people in Baltimore as they've done to African Americans, regardless of the fact that there are twice as many black residents. And the president of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, John Taylor, explained, quote, if lenders are not making loans in a community, the opportunities for people to work their way out of poverty are pretty slim, end quote. Without loans, communities miss out on investment and jobs, and without mortgages, black families are denied the opportunity to build multi-generational wealth. That's why African American families continue to hold dramatically less wealth than white families, and why unemployment rates in cities like Baltimore continue to linger far above the national average. This type of institutional racism exacerbates poverty, crime, and many other serious issues that plague the black community. And those issues lead to more negative stereotypes, more police violence, and more of our fellow Americans feeling shut out of the system. Racial disparities in loans and mortgages are extremely difficult to prove, but this research shows that redlining is still happening in this day and age. Now that we have the proof, we must fight to break this vicious cycle and bring institutional racism to an end. New York's Attorney General Eric Schneiderman believes in the value of public employee unions. That's why he's leading a coalition of more than 20 states and getting them to add their support to the fair share fees that keep those unions operating. Schneiderman and other AGs have signed on to a friend of the court brief in the case of Fredericks versus California Teachers Association. That's the latest anti-union case to be taken up by the U.S. Supreme Court, and it poses another serious threat to our public unions. As we've heard during previous legal challenges, fair share fees allow unions to collect partial dues from non-members who work in a union shop to cover the cost of negotiations that the unions are legally required to do on their behalf. Attorney General Schneiderman said, the right to organize is a fundamental right for American workers. Unions go hand in hand with a strong middle class. And he's exactly right. Hopefully the Supreme Court justices are listening. Virginia is doing right by veterans. Earlier this month, President Obama joined Governor Terry McAuliffe on Veterans Day to announce that Virginia had officially become the first state to find permanent housing for all of their homeless veterans. After finding homes for 1,400 veterans last year, Virginia officials wanted to make sure that more of our former soldiers do not wind up on the street. So that state has set up new systems and promised to find housing for any veteran who becomes homeless within 90 days. Because some cities and states are criminalizing homelessness and cutting back on social services for the poor, they have often left many veterans with nowhere to turn for help. In response, several cities throughout the country have made it a priority find homes for the men and women who risk their lives for our nation. But Virginia is the first state to address the problem so successfully. Good work, Virginia. Anyone with children knows how expensive childcare is these days in our nation. In fact, it's so expensive that many of those who work caring for our children can't cover the cost of caring for their own children. According to a new report from the Economic Policy Institute, the average hourly wage for childcare workers is only $10.31. That means a preschool teacher would have to set aside at least 1/3 of their entire income just to pay for the care of one child, which is a far larger share than recommended. There are more than 1 million child care workers in our country, and the vast majority of them are women. That means that we're asking mothers to care for someone else's kids when we don't pay them enough to care for their own children. This does not make any sense. If we want people to work hard and contribute to our society, we have to ensure that basic services don't cost more than they make. Child care workers provide that important service to others, and the very least we can do is make sure that they earn enough to care for their own families. And finally, love is now the law of the land in Ireland. Last week, the BBC News announced that same-sex marriage is now officially legal in that nation. Back in May, the voters of Ireland passed a public referendum to legalize gay marriage and recognize those who had already been married in other countries. As of this month, Ireland officials must recognize marriages like Orla Howard and Dr. Grianne Courtney, who were wed in the United States in 2013. In an interview with BBC News, Ms. Howard said, "It's a terrific moment because our marriage will be the same as any straight couple's marriage. And for the couples who have been waiting to marry, the new law will bring the recognition and rights that all loving families deserve." Slowly but surely, the world is recognizing that everyone should have the right to marry the person they love, and we should gladly celebrate those victories as they continue. And that's the way it is for the week of November 23rd, 2015. I'm Thom Hartmann on the Economic and Labor News.